You're now watching the political segment on the weekend show. 2 years into the first term of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, we realize that it's just 2025, but the only conversation going on about the country right now is the next elections. People talking about camping from one party to the other, governors fighting against governors, former governors fighting current governors, former ministers. I've heard and read of certain governors threatening to slap ministers or ministers threatening to slap people. What is going on? And well, just so we don't get banned or sued, allegedly. But this is not what we asked for. We have a situation where prices of everything have gone higher. For everyone who pays rent, they will tell you that their rent has increased. But their standard of living hasn't improved. For everyone who you know, they'll tell you that the cost of food has gotten higher. Walk into a supermarket and take 50,000 naira, which is way above half of minimum wage, and you wouldn't live with more than, say, 2 bags. And what exactly are you buying? We don't look at brands anymore when we buy stuff. When I want to buy detergent or soap, in the past I'd be like, I want Ariel, I want clean. Right now I look at the prices.
Yeah.
When people want to buy milk, they don't look at the brand anymore. They look at what
Price,
they could
yeah.
afford to be able to get the next bit. People now have gone from eating twice a day to eating one meal a day. But all we hear about is the next elections. And we only hear politicians come out to speak when they are no longer in favor with the government. The problem with that is the people on the other side of the screen are real people with fathers, brothers, sisters, mothers, with real life situation, without knowing where the next meal is coming from. Fuel prices have gone higher, which means cost of everything is higher. What is actually the state of the nation? Joining us to have this conversation, we have.
We have Kola Alakpini, who is an international human rights lawyer. Good morning, and thanks for joining us on the show.
Good morning, nice to be here.
Welcome back on the show.
Thank you.
You were here before the elections and just after the elections.
I was.
2 years in, and we don't have to wait till June 12th, but 2 years in, how would you assess the performance of this administration as a whole?
Confusing. I would have thought that going by the president's speech, he became famous for being an Agbado president, an Agbadorian. We're going to have maize flowing. The land's going to be flowing with milk and honey and all that. But we haven't seen anything. And you captured it right in your intro. I think the previous administration made a big error and it was a violation of international law anyway, by shutting down the borders. Because, we're signatories to the ECOWAS Treaty, and we're big players in ECOWAS. That treaty allows for free movement of goods and people and everything, and then we just unilaterally closed our borders because we wanted to start producing our food. What we've been able to see is that it was a scam. The rice pyramids by Emefiele were a scam. They just put wood under the pyramids and put some rice on top. We're not producing enough food for ourselves, so we've shot ourselves in the foot. If I were to have the president here, I will tell him to open the borders. Let food come in, especially rice. Rice is our staple. How can somebody become president when rice was 7,500 and you leave and rice is over 100,000? That is a disservice, and it's a sure mark that you failed. You're a scholar. The indices are there. Okay, so we cannot produce enough for ourselves, but we like to. So why can't local production be going on simultaneously when food is coming in, and you just do it, in half measures until you achieve stability? The removal of the fuel subsidy, for instance, and that speech on Inauguration Day created huge inflation, which we're in now, whether the government wants to accept it or not. It should have been done in a phased way. We don't even know if we're still subsidizing fuel or not. Why did we have so much squabbles between NNPC and Dangote if this man has spent 20 billion naira of his, or 20 billion US dollars of his money to be able to allow us to have local production of petroleum, which we know once the price of petroleum goes up, it affects everything in the market. Let me tell you what affects everything as well, the one which we don't pay much attention to. It's electricity tariff. We keep saying, oh, they keep saying, oh, there's nowhere in the world where you don't have to pay for the energy which you use and all that. But how many people in the world have the kind of wealth which we generate from fuel, from energy? The previous government, the PDP government, said under General Obasanjo, in his book, because documented that they spent 16 million US dollars on power, on NEPA, and we have no lights. So something is wrong somewhere. How much would it have costed us then to build a whole new grid from scratch? So that's why I said it's confusing.
You know, it's interesting that he says that just this week, unfortunately I was home, the guys from Abuja Electrical Distribution Company came to my house and said they wanted to check my meter. And I asked why, and they said it's just routine. And I was like, okay, you check it. And at some point, they checked it and say, oh, can you go turn on your AC? Because we want to find out if you are being billed correctly. And I was like, regardless of the size of this house, which you may see big or small, I turn off everything I'm not using because of how expensive your power supply is. And what they were worried about is that for where I was staying, they didn't think I was paying enough. And so while people are trying to reduce the expenses and the hardship, the government is saying, oh, people are not paying enough. And just about 2-3 weeks ago, the Minister of Power, and whenever we hear him speak, he's talking about increasing price of electricity. He's come back to say that the electricity tariffs which we have right now are not sustainable.
No, they're not.
But besides that, we have people like Olubunmi Ojo, who is transforming our immigration system. Passports are ready on time now. I traveled out and came into the country, and I didn't need to speak to anybody crossing through immigration. I think there are some people who are doing
Yes.
commendable work.
Yes.
But let's go to the issue of security.
And before you go to the issue of security, when you mentioned some people doing well, some people have also done badly.
Yes.
And the government just gave them a slap on the wrist. There's no way you will talk about the successes of the Olubunmi Ojos of this world, which I give him kudos for. At least immigration is not where it used to be. Interior is not where it used to be. What happened to Beta Edu? You know, people were just dipping their hands into the till and pilfering money from
The humanitarian.
humanitarian, and that's the agencies. And this one name that is very popular, NEMA,
Yeah.
from NEMA and the humanitarian industry, and they were just dipping their hands into the till and just putting government money into private purses in the billions, and nothing has happened. So you now wonder.
Or the case of Yahaya Bello, who was very amplified, and all of a sudden that has kind of disappeared. But you hear young people getting picked up for other reasons.
for
But-
wearing dreadlocks. Where the governor of a state says if you wear a dreadlock, he's going to arrest you. I
and
mean,
that's a young governor.
This is absurd.
Absolutely.
Why would you judge me if I decide to wear dreadlocks? So the Bob Marleys of this world dare not come to Nigeria again.
You know, Andy, during your intro, you actually hit the nail on the head when you mentioned that the cost of living keeps increasing and affecting everyday Nigerians, but the government 2 years in, they're only concerned now of the next election. So are they elected to be re-elected? Is that what they do?
Or is it a birthright?
Exactly. It's so unfortunate. So, which leads me to my next question, you know, on the cost of living compared to 2 years, prior and now. What specific leadership decisions do you think led to that? Led to the tariffs in electricity, led to, removing subsidy and increasing fuel prices? Right now, before, 8,000 naira would fuel my full tank my car. But right now, it's about 55, 57,000. It's absurd.
You're lucky. I pay almost 80,000.
I was about to say so.
I pay almost 80,000.
So what
It's
leadership
crazy.
decisions led to all of this
Well-
increase that keeps biting at Nigerians?
Something is not right. We first need to acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
If I were in a position where, I could make some of these executive decisions, I wouldn't be struggling to increase the minimum wage to 70,000 naira because it doesn't make any sense. The minimum wage cannot buy a sack of rice. So what you should be looking at, and I'm not an expert in economy, I'm more of a, in the legal side, but the economy affects every one of us. What we should be looking at is how to drive these prices down. And I told you earlier that we need to open the borders. We cannot produce food for us. We're too many and we don't produce enough. Simple. Once you bring in, you allow rice, shiploads of rice to flood the country, the price is going to drop. That's the first thing. At least I know that because there will be supply that will outweigh the demand, and everybody's good. And we Nigerians are not very difficult to please. Once you have a full tummy and everything, people really don't grumble about the government. 1,000 naira note now is nothing. You know, I came back recently and I gave my gate man ran an errand and all, and I gave him 500. He collected it, but he smiled because obviously, you know, people like, see this man, no, within the goal for Nigeria. So, but as I started buying stuff around and everything, I just found out if you're going to, you know, dash someone money, 1,000 naira is, what's he going to buy with it? And one akara is 100 naira.
I bought
One
a
piece
pot
of
this
yam.
morning and I could barely put it in one hand, 5,000 naira.
One akara is 100 naira. One piece of yam is 100 naira. So if
Plantain is now a luxury.
Oh, yes.
so, there you go. So it seems as if people in power are very disconnected with what's actually happening on the street, and it's very easy to be disconnected. One, the president is holed up in this
Echo
huge,
chamber.
splendid villa that you hardly hear what's going on the street. And when he rides in his vehicles in a long convoy with everything consuming fuel and all that, is detached completely because
Because the roads are cleared for 1 hour before he moves about.
and the vehicles are armored, so you don't even hear anything. Otherwise, when the president went to Lagos and the people were on the streets and were shouting the power, he ought to have heard. Maybe later they'll play the tape for him or the video and all that. And he says he doesn't go to social media because they abuse the H out of him and etc. So we have a disconnection between our people. And then you now see them, everybody clamoring for elections all the time. The political parties have no ideology. They're just special purpose vehicles to get into power. And each and every one of them is guilty of this. Even Mr. President himself, with ACN and AD, and then evolving into where in the local crisis and all that before he became president. Even Peter Obi is not exempt from APGA to PDP, and then when PDP were going to frustrate his dreams, then he went to Labour Party. So there's
Same with Atiku.
there's no ideology with Atiku.
So talking about ideologies, I need to bring it back to security with an intersection when it comes to the law, being a lawyer. Rivers State has been in a state of emergency. Some people call that an aberration. Some people say for security reasons they're going to start blowing off pipelines. I'm from Benue State, and if you read about it, the farmer header crisis have claimed about 6 times more than the lives Boko Haram has claimed, and it's largely underreported. It's unfortunate that I was at some workshop in Egypt and we were talking about the middle belt of the North Central crisis in Nigeria, and we don't talk about it in Nigeria. Then Rivers State, because they're an oil-producing state, there's a refinery there, they have 1 or 2 political issues, and what happens? They suspend the governor, bring in the former military person to be administrator, suspending the governor. It's said that in our constitution, that's not how it's meant to be. But we've also noticed there's no form of negotiation or mediation going on to cut short that duration. It's now 6 months, which has now become like a fixed term. What happens if someone goes to court and says, I lost 6 months of my tenure, and so it needs to be given back to me, which changes the election cycle and all whatnot? What's the legality of what's happening in Rivers State, and how does that affect security?
This is right up my alley. I think the president, I'm not saying that he shouldn't have declared state of emergency in Rivers, but if there's a place where the state of emergency ought to have been declared, it should be Plateau State and Benue State. But you could say his predecessor was very nonchalant. 78 people. Benue State is very special to me because I did my youth service there. So I know the terrain like the back of my hand. 78 farmers killed in one day by Fulani herdsmen. The president looks away. It doesn't even go there. It doesn't even behave as if. So we just, not this president, the previous one. Yeah. You hear, 40 people were killed. I was in Bokos last summer, when I came around um, with my friends from the US, and we went there to shoot a documentary in Buckhorst, and all these people who were attacked over Christmas Day. And, they're largely neglected. The indicators are there. It's a recurring decimal, and then it happened again. So what do we learn? And why should people trust the government? So they just come in after the attacks have been done, come in with bags of rice and blankets and everything, and then they disappear again. And we keep saying that the governors are the chief security officers of the states. It's a fancy title for nothing. It means nothing. And I'll explain. The governor cannot command troops. The police in Benue State and in Plateau State do not answer to the governor. They might sit with him in cabinet for the security meeting and all. That's where it ends. The police would answer to the commissioner of police. The commissioner of police will answer to the inspector general. The inspector general of police will answer to the president. So the buck stops on the president's table. The president is responsible for the insecurity in Benue and Plateau State. End of. And someone needs to tell him. And he said before, oh, I applied for the job. Blame me if something goes wrong. So we're telling you now. Because he hasn't acted well. As far as, why should these attacks be recorded? Are these people so mysterious that we can't arrest them? Why should anybody be walking around on the streets of Nigeria with an AK-47 and other exotic, sophisticated weapons and nobody is able to arrest? What is going on? Why are we, and this is the reason why they keep saying that Nigeria is a failing state or a failed state, or we don't want to be using such terms in our country. But maybe if we use such terms, maybe it will shake us out of this slumber. And then we're talking about Rivers State. Well, I think I saw a video sometimes ago, and someone said, "Oh, Fayose said it." Fayose had warned this gentleman Fubara, who was a career civil servant, and said, "Don't look for trouble and everything." As amusing as that might sound, it's also pathetic because it means that River State is in the clutches of one man. As you know, I'm not a career politician. I don't carry any card of any party, so I'm at liberty to speak. You might not like the politics of Wike, but I think he has performed very well as a minister of the FCT with the amount of infrastructure which we've seen that has gone on over here. We had an FCT minister for 8 years that went asleep.
Yes.
So
I mean, the last two FCT ministers prior to Wike
exactly
have been.
So,
yeah.
So you don't really know the intricacies of what happened between Wike and Fubara. I know Wike came up once and said, "Oh, he's trying to destroy my structure. I'm a politician. I'm not going to allow that to happen." And then, sort of abracadabra. Even Fubara himself demolished the whole State House of Assembly and said, "Oh, a fickle excuse. Oh, it's not safe for habitation." And they just, I think River State was going to turn into a war zone. The president has the right to declare a state of emergency, but there are steps to follow. You don't just go on TV at 7 p.m. and just declare a state of emergency and then go to the National Assembly and start seeking approval. And that is the reason why the National Assembly under Bukola Saraki seemed to be more proactive and they had more bite than this one over there. And this person over there himself, at some point, it was embroiled in his own personal issues and tainted with all this sex scandal going on between him
and different outbursts and all the things which he says, which they say are just jokes, which a lot of them are unacceptable.
They're horrible.
So besides the sexual allegations, this is someone who we saw on TV telling the senators that their Christmas package has been given to them.
Which
has
was
told
bribery.
someone not to act like that in a club.
Yeah.
This someone has said about Warsaw and those utterances have been unacceptable regardless.
If we were in a country where things function, some other times he would have had to go.
Yes.
But that tells you the kind of individuals that have found themselves their ways into power.
We're almost out of time, but with the state of emergency, yes, something had to be done in River State based on your submission, which I agree to in an extent. But we've seen when they've had state of emergency on food security,
Yes.
state of emergency on education, the ministers weren't removed.
No.
The ministers weren't removed.
There's no
The
provision.
heads were not
There's
removed.
no provision in the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria that talks about state of emergency with the ministers. The two, where it addresses is the states, that a state of emergency can be declared in the state.
But there can be a
However,
leeway. You don't. The
with-
Constitution doesn't say you should
with the
suspend.
ministers, the
Yes.
president is the one who hires and fires. Yes, they go to the National Assembly and some of them just take a bow, but the president is allowed to regime.
But that's the point. The president has the same power to suspend and remove ministers if they're not acting. Everyone has been complaining about defense.
Yes,
There was even
and
a fake
electricity.
news release recent. And so they switched ministers. The ministers of defense have remained. The selection of those ministers, some people have questioned because they came from
But the president
different
cannot switch the
areas.
governors.
But the president
But he was
cannot.
able to
However,
suspend.
if you have the power to do this with the governors,
Yeah.
you have the veto to remove ministers who are not performing in their
Absolutely.
spaces
Absolutely.
without
It doesn't
answering
even
to
have-
anybody.
It doesn't have to go to National Assembly to do that.
So why does this case have to be extreme? And you mentioned Plateau, Benue, we've not had state of emergency with such drastic measures. Is it because the economy is better or more important than the lives of the people who are being lost in those other places?
As a matter of fact, when you're talking about the economy, I think we should have focused more on Benue and Plateau because those are the food baskets. The Benue State is known as food basket of the country, and Plateau State has
Very
one of the
agrarian.
most, how do you say, the soil, the
Yeah.
most fertile
Fertile.
soil. We grow potatoes, there's strawberries, there's apple. It's fantastic,
coffee.
place, which is one of the reasons why it's so attractive to these herdsmen who just want to just plow their cattle into the savannah. So we are or into the islands, as the case may be. So that's where we should actually be focusing on they used to have milk production in VOM, with the Veterinary Institute, and yogurt and everything. If there should be a state of emergency that should be declared, or where we're going to pump our money and we keep talking about agriculture, that's because it has a spiraling effect on everyone. Oil money gets rich quick money. And that's why people don't want to go to the farms and do every other thing. The problem with oil money is when the market slumps, everybody's in trouble. So we need to look at alternatives, not the fake rice pyramids that Emefiele was talking about. Everything has now crumbled now into.
So what are these alternatives before we go?
Well, as I said, the borders need to be opened. Let food come in and crash the cost of food prices. That is the first thing. The jacking up of electricity tariffs every time is not making sense. Because I'm going to pass on the cost to the next person. How much is it for your haircut now? I don't cut my hair anymore. I just apply shaving cream.
I used to do it every week. Now I do it once in 2 weeks.
I don't cut my hair anymore. Not that I have much anyway, but I just use shaving cream. I save myself the cost.
Which means
A
your
good-
barber is losing money.
That's it. Because he's going to, if there's no light, he has to use the generator. When there's light, you've jacked up the power. Everybody's switching off. I didn't
it's
know
a
we can be
lose-lose
so
situation.
obedient in Nigeria. Years ago, my dad used to say that in the late 70s, 90s, switch off the power. We'll just leave everything on 24 hours. You dare not do so anymore in this era of the prepaid meters and everything. And that's why NEPA keeps coming to check on you. Oh, you should be using much more than this.
Yeah.
And they did it to my clients somewhere in Wuse 2 there. It's got a huge sprawling garden. When they first came in, they were paying like 400,000. They're paying about 13 million now. They keep coming, and just went for blood. They keep sucking him dry. So I told him, Mr. Gentleman, you need to go to China and look for an alternative power generation.
And guess what?
which
They're
sus-
proposing to ban solar equipment.
which
being
they're going to tighten the nose again. So he's gone into import solar panels from China, and he's going to do it in a phase where this whole place you can just do an alternative energy
Go off
grid,
the grid.
completely go off the grid, because they would not stop coming. They've smelled blood, they see a successful garden, and they'll keep coming for more. So we can't keep, and this is the issue, we're increasing electricity, we're doing this, we're doing that, but the people in government do not have any sacrifices to show for it. If petrol costs this much, why would anyone be driving with a 70 vehicle convoy with buses, with this, with that, and then they shut down the whole route for you, and then you see the ministers are passing and there are like 16 vehicles in the convoy? What message are you sending to the people on the street? So these are the issues. You keep telling us to, take a hit for it. You're buying the private jets or your presidential jets.
Yachts.
Before someone went, they quickly bought a yacht and said, "Oh, we've already bought the yacht anyway. We're just coming to seek the approval for the money." An afterthought. So the optics is not looking very good for this government at all. And then you have the president's son, who is unelected, who is, I thought, he's a colleague. And then he's just gallivanting around. He behaves like a special duties minister himself now. You know, we don't even see the vice president anymore.
Because I think this conversation is inexhaustible. We'll bring you on a couple of weeks or months later to have a follow-up on this conversation, especially when he's done his 2 years officially in office to do a review. But thanks for your candid thoughts and your opinion, for always gracing us with your presence and knowledge on
Thank
the
you.
Weekend Show.
So it was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. We'll take a quick break. When we return, more on the Weekend Show.